Meet Tarek, a young boy who lived on a small island of the coast of Hawaii. He had always been proud of his calm and steady nature. Until one day, he wasn't. As he grew older, he found it harder to control his temper. One day, he found himself at the marketplace when his temper snapped. It was a tiny thing, really, an old man bumping into him and spilling a basket of fruit. But in that moment, the anger inside him, which he hadn't even realized was there, surged like a storm. He yelled words he couldn't remember later, and the old man simply bowed his head and left, his shoulders heavy with sadness. For the rest of the day, Tarek felt ashamed, but the anger lingered. What had changed? He used to be so patient, so steady. Now it felt like every small thing was an irritation, a fire waiting to be sparked. Later that evening, Tarek found himself at the edge of a cliff, looking out over the valley, breathing in the cool air. That's where he met the mountain sage, an old man with eyes as calm as the still water. "I saw what happened at the marketplace," the sage said, his voice gentle.
Do you know why you're so angry, Tarek?
Tarek didn't have an answer. The sage smiled and pointed to the horizon, where storm clouds were gathering. "Do you see those clouds? They come and go, but the mountain stands firm. The storm rages, but it doesn't move the mountain. Anger is like the storm, and you must learn to be the mountain."
How?
Tarek asked, frustration leaking into his words. "How do I stop the storm inside?" The sage handed him a small stone. "Carry this stone with you for a day. When you feel anger rising, hold it in your hand and squeeze it. But don't speak, don't act, just be the mountain." Tarek scoffed at the simplicity of the idea, but he took the stone. The next day, he did as the sage instructed. He carried the stone in his pocket, and when his temper began to rise, he would squeeze it hard, his knuckles turning white, but he kept silent. At first, it didn't feel like it was working. He still felt the anger, bubbling up like a storm ready to break. But then something strange happened. By the end of the day, the anger wasn't as strong. The storm inside him hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, like a breeze instead of a hurricane. Tarek returned to the sage. "It helped, but I still felt angry. It didn't go away."
The sage nodded.
"Anger doesn't vanish, Tarek. It's part of being human. But you don't have to feed it. You don't have to become the storm. The more you practice, the more you'll notice that anger, like the storm clouds, comes and goes. But the mountain stays." Tarek thought about the old man in the marketplace. He realized now that his anger had nothing to do with the spilled fruit. It had been building for weeks, maybe months, from small frustrations he hadn't addressed. For the next several days, Tarek carried the stone, and each time he felt the anger rising, he reminded himself to stay still, to let the storm pass. Slowly, he began to feel lighter, the weight of his anger no longer controlling him. Months later, Tarek stood in the marketplace again. A child ran into him, knocking over a jar of water. This time, he felt the spark of irritation, but instead of reacting, he smiled and helped the child pick up the pieces. The storm had come, but Tarek had remained the mountain. The sage's words echoed in his mind. "You can't stop the storm, but you can choose to stand firm." And from that day forward, Tarek lived by those words, teaching others that peace isn't found in avoiding anger, but in learning to let it pass like a storm through the sky.